No. It's a small word, and it's very easy to tell people who might be feeling overwhelmed that they should just say no more. I don't know if you've had this experience. I certainly have. But the reality is, it can be hard to say no, and sometimes for actually pretty good reasons. So, one alternative is to just say nothing, right? To ignore it. If it wasn't a face-to-face communication, to just pretend it never happened, put the burden of any kind of follow-up on the other person. But often that doesn't really feel right. In fact, it can damage relationships, including the one you have with yourself about your own integrity. So, how do you navigate between saying yes and getting overwhelmed and just shutting things down with that hard no? The Getting Things Done GTD methodology provides an alternative to this dilemma by getting clear on your areas of responsibility, by getting clear on the timing and relative priority of what's coming into you, and by getting clear on your agreement to taking in new commitments and new communications overall. So if you've been really feeling overwhelmed, feeling like too much is being asked of you, like everyone wants a piece of you and there's nothing really left for you, stick around for some thoughts about how you can respond to competing demands with an alternative to the word no that you can actually feel good about. First thing to point out, and it may be obvious, is that someone asking you a question doesn't necessarily obligate you to answer them, right? I think the younger generation seems to be almost born with an inbuilt spam filter, right? That's their survival skill of their generation, to be able to deal with so much input. But it can also kind of swing too far the other way into sort of a lack of just basic courtesy. So a big part of understanding what you need to respond to has to do with the underlying agreed upon relationship. And the simplest example is just that there's a very big difference between spam you get from a stranger and a communication you get from your boss on a project or a partner on a child that you're raising together, right? So the first thing to do is get really clear on the relationship involved and the agreed upon responsibilities within that relationship, especially in a team environment. Now, a lot of people have this idea that we should all be team players. And I get the spirit of that. And at the same time, there can be kind of a dark side to that, in that once you kind of decide that everybody owns everything, in a way, kind of nobody owns anything, right? You sort of throw the ball up in the air and everyone assumes someone else is going to catch it and it falls. So just as, let's say, an engine, right, needs components that each, are differentiated from the other and are working in concert, so too do teams and companies need clear areas of responsibility delineated. So one thing you can do, frankly, is if something's not in your area, you can say so. It's not a no, it's not a hard refusal. It's clarification, usually. It's asking a question. Hey, I think this is actually so-and-so's area, and I'm really happy to provide support and input and guidance, but I think they're the best place to kind of drive this forward. That's not no, that's creating clarity for yourself and the group, or clarifying your own understanding of who's expected to do what. Because again, when everyone owns something, the truth is a lot of stuff actually gets missed. And there's a kind of squishy feeling about, everyone sort of feeling a little bit like maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't own this particular thing. So getting clear, I had this experience recently. Someone said, hey, I haven't heard from, any of you, and mentioned several people about this particular project. And I just wrote back and said, hey, you know what? So-and-so is actually the kind of project lead on this. They'll get back to you with an update on the timing. I'm just consulting and providing support on this. That went down fine because everyone just, now had that agreed understanding about what the lines of communication are. In the Getting Things Done model, what we call the areas of focus or areas of responsibility go a really long way toward helping you clarify what all of these areas are that are kind of in and out of scope in terms of your need to respond to what comes in. It guides the projects you take on tremendously well. And when it's aligned with the bigger picture of what other people's areas are, and you can see that there's not a lot of overlap, or if there is, they're in ways that are productive, this can really help a lot with not ever having to say no, in a way, right? With kind of preemptively dealing with this stuff coming in, because you have clarity about who to ask and whom, you can ask for what, rather than sort of throwing the ball up in the air and then getting disgruntled when nobody responds. Another thing you can do that's really valuable is to get clear on the timing and relative priority of what's being asked for you, both for yourself and for others. So if it is in your area, it's from the boss, it's from your partner, etc. I think one of the big stressors, certainly I find, is that it seems like my brain doesn't really differentiate, or at least in some part of it, thinks that kind of everything is now. Everything needs to happen now, that I'm already working on this, but now I suddenly need to work on that. And of course, it's impossible, but it doesn't, stop us from feeling that momentary sense of stress when a new thing comes in. We go, oh gosh, I've got to dive on that. But do you? Do you really? I would say that rather than no, one of the best kind of phrases you can at least internally say is not yet, or even better, not yet, however, ... I am still going to do something about it. So there's no need to act now on an awful lot of things that are seemingly urgent, or even stuff that sometimes gets marked urgent, right? It's not actually a drop everything. But if you drop it, as in it never happens, that would be a big problem. 60 to 80% of what we see in people's inboxes is probably just reference or rubbish. It's not actually actionable, but that stuff that has to go somewhere. And we recommend it goes somewhere other than just kind of languishing in whatever communication medium it came in through, right? So you need to decide what something means to you, and you need to get it out of that proverbial inbox, whether that is email or Slack or Teams or WhatsApp or whatever it is, how it's come in, so that you can have a fighting chance of looking at all of these things in context with one another. And then, of course, it's very important to acknowledge the communication, to ask for any kind of clarification. Hey, what's your ideal timing on this? What's your sense of priority on this in relation to these other things I have going on, particularly if that's a boss, right? I think one of the biggest managerial cop-outs is to look at someone that's overwhelmed and say, well, you should say no more often, without offering them help on the relative priorities of things and what they can actually say yes and no to. So reach out, ask for support, ask for help. Remember that you don't have to respond right away, right? A response that says, hey, you know what, I've got this, and give me a little time to think about how best to approach this, because I really want to do a good job for you or give you the right answer, is certainly a response in my world that would be very acceptable for most of the kind of things that I send out. So not everything's now. Get clear on the relative timing and priority of what's coming into you, and hopefully that'll give you at least a breath of air. So another important thing you can do to help yourself is to get clear on your level of commitment overall to different types of communications that come in. Everyone's pretty clear that spam goes into a spam filter, but what about the other stuff? Are there some ways that you can set expectations? Well, yeah, there are a few good ones that I've found. So one is that in a lot of GTD-enabled organizations, using the to field or mentioning someone in the message usually indicates there's some action for them, whereas the CC field is often saying this is just for information, this is FYI. Doing that little bit of pre-thinking about who actually, has the action on this, who owns the project, that kind of thing can go a really long way toward mitigating what I once heard, called idea grenades that sort of get lobbed into these we work as a team kind of environments, and then somebody has to sort of fall on it, or everyone has to run away in order to avoid the shrapnel, right? So another thing you can do, and so I've done this, is on my private website, my just personal site, I was getting a lot of different requests for a lot of different things. And at some point on the contact form, I actually said, I'm not going to be able to respond to all unsolicited requests. So right up front, I'm just saying, look, because you've asked something of me doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to respond to that. And that was a big one for me, right? Being a polite person, someone that wants to always write thank you notes, etc. At some point with the volume, you may have to set some communication standards that are more broad in that way. And then, there was an interesting one that came up. I have an out of office message from time to time when I'm out of the office, obviously not able to respond or not wanting to. And in that message, I said, I think something like, I'm going to be gone from such and such a time. I look forward to giving your message the attention it deserves on my return. And a friend of mine who's, I'd say, rather attuned to the subtleties of the English language pointed out that sort of on the surface, that looks like, I'm taking your message seriously, but actually the attention it deserves is a rather variable thing, right? So the reality is, I don't want to set expectations that any and every spamster that, sends me a message when my out of office is on is going to get a reply. They don't deserve any attention because the relationship, is one where I don't have any area of responsibility with them. And there's really nothing more that needs to be said other than nothing itself. So sometimes it's appropriate, to not respond. But if you set up those communication standards in advance, like, hey, you know what? If you haven't checked with your line level manager first, please don't, come to me, as about particular topics or whatever. So by utilizing the GTD areas of focus and areas of responsibility to get really clear on what the relationships are, the standards are, and what your levels of commitment are to any particular request, so that you can, in some ways, preempt those requests, preempt the need to say no altogether. And then where there isn't clarity, to ask for and solicit clarity about who should be doing what. By then, capturing and clarifying, so you don't feel like you have to jump on things right away just as they come in. You can give yourself quite a bit of slack, and then, of course, acknowledge back, hey, I got it, and what's your timing, and what's the relative priority? These kind of things, asking good questions. The sort of not now, however, let's get more information about this, which is an alternative to no. And then finally, setting some expectations and agreed standards well in advance with your team, with your colleagues, by using standardized messaging, however you do that, so it's clear before the message even comes in, or as soon as it comes in the case of an automated reply, what your level of commitment is going to be to respond to that stuff. These days, you need razor sharp clarity to cut through the incredible spectrum of job and life critical stuff that's coming at you, all the way down to just the deluge of spam. You need a way to be able to process all of your inputs first, to be able to get that into a system you trust, so you can look at your full commitment load against the new incoming stuff and make smart decisions about what you do and don't take on. And frankly, these days, I think that's a survival skill. So if you're interested in this, if this, made any kind of sense to you at all as useful, I would highly recommend you get to one of our open enrollment seminars, where you can learn all of the different aspects of the getting things done methodology, all of the different ways in which this can help you if you've been struggling to say no, or finding that that's, shutting things down in a way that doesn't feel right, and yet yes is getting you overwhelmed. We can help with that. And at very minimum, I recommend you subscribe to our YouTube channel. We put out content and information like this very regularly. I hope more than anything that you've taken something away from this that will help you to feel like you don't always have to say either yes or no, but that you can challenge and push back in ways that are constructive and useful to you and to the team, that you can get an inventory of what's going on, so you know what you can and can't take on in terms of capacity, psychologically, and just time-wise as well. And that as an end result, you can feel really good about the choices you make, whether that is to take something on or to push back on it. See you next time.